The dust hung thick in the air of Redemption's town square, choking as the noose around Eleanor Whitefeather's neck. Blood thundered in her ears, drowning out the mob's roar, but not their hatred. She could feel that pressing against her skin like the merciless desert sun. At 16, the daughter of a native woman and white settler, had survived prejudice, poverty, and her father's death. But she never imagined her life would end at the end of a rope surrounded by familiar faces, twisted with bloodlust. A man in the front row spat the glob landing near her bare feet. Thieving half-breed. His snarled eyes narrowed to dark slits. Hang her and be done with it. I didn't take your money, Eleanor cried, voice breaking, as the hemp fibers bit deeper into her flesh. I was working all day. Mrs. Weller knows she saw me. Shut your lying mouth, someone shouted, and the crowd's angry murmur swelled like approaching thunder. We found the lockbox under your bed. The rickety wagon beneath her feet shifted as Mayor Hollister stepped forward, his once fine suit straining across his substantial belly. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the theatrical gravity he attempted to project. The evidence speaks for itself, he announced, voice carrying across the square. This girl, this outsider, stole our relief fund while we faced starvation. The money box was found in her possession, along with a map leading out of town. Our future was in that box, and she planned to steal it from us. Eleanor's eyes darted desperately across the sea of hostile faces, searching for a single glimmer of mercy. There was Mrs. Weller at the edge of the crowd, wringing her hands helplessly, her voice drowned by the mob's fury when she tried to speak. Beside the general store stood Ben Hawkins, head bowed in shame, unable to look at the girl he'd taught to read just 3 summers ago. Sheriff Davis strode forward, badge gleaming with unearned authority in the harsh sunlight, a cold satisfaction in his eyes that made Eleanor's stomach twist. Justice must be swift in times like these, he declared, one hand resting on his holstered pistol. We can't afford the luxury of a lengthy trial. His fingers gripped Eleanor's chin, forcing her to face him. No one wants to hear your lies, half-breed, he whispered, his voice pitched for her ears alone. That spring-fed land of yours will finally go to someone who deserves it. The hatred in his eyes burned hotter than his whiskey breath against her face. Before Eleanor could respond, a gunshot cracked the air. The crowd scattered like startled birds as a horse's thundering hooves split their ranks. The magnificent black stallion reared dramatically, its rider controlling the beast with casual expertise, while simultaneously aiming a smoking revolver skyward. The woman astride the horse seemed carved from the red cliffs themselves, weathered, formidable, unyielding. Dust coated her leather riding clothes, and a week's worth of hard travel marked her features, yet something in her posture commanded attention more effectively than any shouted order. That's enough, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos with deadly calm. Few noticed how her left arm hung at an awkward angle, or the dried bloodstain on her sleeve, evidence of a narrow escape just hours earlier. Sheriff Davis's hand moved toward his pistol. This doesn't concern you, stranger. Ride on. The woman's cold smile never reached her eyes. I believe it does concern me when a town decides to lynch a girl without proper trial. She guided her horse closer to the gallows dust, rising beneath its hooves. Scarlet Blackwood. She introduced herself with deliberate slowness. I track men who break the law for a living, and what I'm seeing here looks remarkably like murder disguised as justice. You're bleeding on our town square, Miss Blackwood. Sheriff Davis observed with false concern, nodding toward her injured arm. Perhaps you should see a doctor before inserting yourself into local affairs. Scarlet's gaze remained steady. The 3 men who gave me this wound won't be bothering anyone again. Neither will you if you don't step away from that girl. Eleanor watched the exchange with desperate hope blossoming in her chest. The stranger's arrival had frozen the execution, creating a fragile moment where anything seemed possible. We found the lockbox under her bed, a weather-beaten farmer shouted, breaking the tense silence. along with a map showing routes out of town. What more proof do you need? Perhaps proof that wasn't planted. Scarlet replied, her eyes never leaving the sheriff's. I've hunted enough men to recognize a frame job when I see one. This has all the markings. The crowd's mood wavered confusion, replacing bloodlust as mutters spread through their ranks. You dare accuse me of corruption? Sheriff Davis growled, drawing himself up. I've protected this town for 15 years. Impressive. Scarlet drawled, lowering her voice to ensure the crowd strained to hear every word. Especially given your father was killed by this girl's tribe 20 years back. Remarkable how you've overcome such prejudice to deliver impartial justice. The sheriff's face darkened with rage as the crowd's murmurs grew louder, several citizens exchanging troubled glances. The girl comes with me. Scarlet stated not a request, but a declaration. You'll have your justice, but proper justice, not this mockery. This is outrageous. Mayor Hollister spluttered, mopping his brow with a soiled handkerchief. We handle our own affairs in redemption. Then handle them lawfully. Scarlet countered, or I ride to the territorial governor with news of a town that conducts executions without proper trials. I'm certain he'd be most interested considering his recent proclamation against frontier vigilantism. The crowd stirred uneasily, many clearly having no knowledge of any such proclamation, but unwilling to call her bluff. The sheriff's hand hovered near his gun, calculating his odds against Scarlet's battle-worn confidence. The girl stays in custody until we sort this out, he finally said, attempting to salvage authority from the situation. No. Scarlet replied simply. She comes with me. Your eagerness to see her hang suggests she might suffer an unfortunate accident in your jail. Sheriff Davis's face contorted with barely contained rage. You can't just... The words died in his throat as Scarlet's gun appeared in her hand, aimed with unwavering precision at his chest. Few in the crowd had even seen her draw. I can and I will, she stated flatly. Unless you fancy testing whether your reputation with that pistol matches mine. A burly blacksmith pushed forward from the crowd, his face a mask of confusion. If she's innocent, why'd you find that box under her bed, Sheriff? You have a witness who saw you searching. The question hung in the air like gun smoke. I don't answer to you, Chambers. The sheriff snapped a muscle twitching in his jaw. I answer to the law. A law you seem remarkably eager to circumvent. Scarlet observed, maneuvering her horse closer to the gallows. With one fluid motion, she leaned down and sliced through Eleanor's bindings with a knife produced from her boot. Eleanor stumbled forward, legs nearly buckling after hours standing on the wagon. Scarlet extended her good arm and with surprising strength hauled the girl onto her horse. The people of Redemption will have their justice, Scarlet announced to the crowd. But it will come from truth, not convenient accusations. Remember this day and ask yourselves who truly seeks to steal your future. With that parting shot, she wheeled her horse around and galloped out of town, Eleanor clinging desperately to her waist, the thunderstruck crowd too shocked to give immediate pursuit. They rode hard for hours, putting miles between themselves and Redemption, before Scarlet finally slowed at a secluded creek sheltered by cottonwood trees. Eleanor slid from the horse legs buckling as she hit the ground, the reality of her near execution hitting her in waves of delayed terror. Thank you. She whispered, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her face. But why did you help me? No one in that town ever stood up for me before. Scarlet dismounted with careful movements favoring her injured arm. Let's just say I know what it's like to be judged by blood rather than actions, she replied, untying her saddlebags. Now tell me everything. Who wants you dead and why? As Scarlet built a small fire, Eleanor recounted the events leading to her arrest, how the town's relief fund had vanished, how the sheriff had miraculously discovered the empty lockbox beneath her bed. despite her working at Mrs. Weller's store all day when the theft supposedly occurred. But there's more, Eleanor said hesitantly, pulling a leather cord from around her neck. A small iron key hung from it, concealed beneath her clothes. My father left me land when he died last winter, not much, but it has a spring that never runs dry, even in the worst droughts. Sheriff Davis has been trying to buy it for months, offering less than it's worth. And you wouldn't sell? Scarlet concluded, studying the girl with newfound interest. Eleanor's chin lifted slightly. It's all I have left of my father. He loved that land. She paused, lowering her voice, as though sharing a dangerous secret. He also told me something before he died, something I've never told anyone. There's supposed to be gold somewhere on that property. Scarlet's eyes narrowed. Gold? You're certain? My father made me memorize markings on rocks near the spring, said they were a map left by my mother's ancestors. He called it the place where the sun sleeps in the stones. Eleanor's gaze hardened with sudden understanding. I think the sheriff knows, or at least suspects. Maybe that's why he wants my land so badly. That would explain the urgency behind your execution, Scarlet mused. Stealing the town's money provides a convenient excuse to hang you legally, leaving your land available for claim. But I didn't take their money, Eleanor insisted. Of course you didn't. Scarlet agreed. I'd wager our esteemed sheriff and mayor engineered the whole thing. Question is, how do we prove it? She winced suddenly, the movement aggravating her wounded arm. Eleanor noticed for the first time the extent of the injury. You're hurt badly. Let me help. Without waiting for permission, she gently examined the wound, a deep graze that had torn through flesh, but miraculously missed bone. Who did this to you? Bounty hunters, Scarlet replied tersely. 3 men tracking me since Silverdale. Thought they could claim the price on my head. There's a price on your head? Eleanor asked, eyes widening as she cleaned the wound with water from the creek. A ghost of a smile touched Scarlet's lips. Several. Not all bounties are sanctioned by legitimate law. I've made powerful enemies hunting certain men. Is that why you were passing through Redemption? I was tracking someone, Scarlet admitted. But that business concluded rather definitively yesterday. The cold precision in her voice suggested the man in question would never trouble anyone again. As night fell, they made plans. Scarlet would return to Redemption alone to investigate, while Eleanor remained hidden in an abandoned trapper's cabin nearby. I need to find proof of what the sheriff's done, Scarlet explained. Evidence that will convince even the most desperate townspeople that their leaders betrayed them. I'm coming with you, Eleanor declared suddenly, her voice firmer than Scarlet had yet heard it. Too dangerous. You'll be recognized immediately. It's my life they're trying to steal, Eleanor insisted. And I know things about Redemption and its people that you don't, things that might help us find the truth. She picked up a smooth stone from beside the creek, turning it over thoughtfully. My mother's people believe that truth is like water. It always finds its way to the surface, no matter how many rocks try to block its path. I want to be there when the sheriff's truth comes flooding out. Scarlet studied the girl, seeing not just fear now, but a burning sense of injustice that reminded her uncomfortably of herself at a younger age. It'll be dangerous, she warned. If they catch you, they won't bother with a trial next time. Eleanor met her gaze steadily. I'm already supposed to be dead. What more can they do to me? Plenty, Scarlet replied grimly. But I take your point. She nodded sharply. All right, but you follow my lead, do exactly as I say. And if I tell you to run, you run, no questions, no hesitation. Deal. Deal, Eleanor agreed solemnly. The next morning, they approached Redemption from the south, where dense thickets provided cover. Eleanor had disguised herself with dirt-smudged face and borrowed clothes, her distinctive dark hair hidden beneath a scarf. They slipped into town through back alleys, making their way to the general store where Mrs. Weller nearly dropped a jar of preserves when they entered through the storeroom door. "Good Lord, child," she whispered, embracing Eleanor. "I thought you were dead for certain." "Not yet," Eleanor replied with grim humor. "But we need your help, Mrs. Weller. I need to prove I was working here when the theft happened." The storekeeper nodded vigorously. "Of course you were. From opening until sunset, never left once. I told the sheriff that, but he dismissed me outright, said I was covering for you out of pity." We need more than your word," Scarlet explained. "We need proof that the sheriff and mayor are behind this." Mrs. Weller glanced around nervously before leaning closer. "Young Timothy at the bank," she whispered. "He came in here looking terrified 2 days ago, kept muttering about things not being right about the mayor coming at odd hours. Poor boy's scared half to death of the sheriff, though." "He's not the only one," Eleanor observed, noticing something on a high shelf. "Mrs. Weller, is that my journal?" The older woman nodded. "Yes, dear. The sheriff searched your room, tore it apart. I found that in the alley behind the store afterward, must have dropped it when they were planting that lockbox. I kept it safe, knowing you'd want it back." Eleanor's eyes widened as she paged through the leather-bound book. "My father's journal. He gave this to me before he died. It has all his notes about our land." Her fingers traced the careful drawings and cryptic notes, some in English, some in her mother's native language. "This proves the sheriff knew about the gold. He must have searched my things, found this, and realized what it meant." Scarlet examined the journal with growing interest. "This changes everything. We need to get into the sheriff's office. If he has the town's money hidden there, that's all the proof we need." "Sheriff Davis always takes his dinner at the hotel around 6, Mrs. Weller offered. "Stays for at least an hour, especially on Wednesdays when they serve beefsteak. Deputy Miller usually joins him." "Perfect," Scarlet decided. "We'll move then." As dusk approached, they watched from the shadows as Sheriff Davis and Deputy Miller made their way to the hotel dining room. Scarlet picked the lock on the sheriff's office with practiced ease, and they slipped inside the dimly lit room, smelling of tobacco and gun oil. "Keep watch," she instructed Eleanor. "Whistle if anyone comes." Eleanor positioned herself by the window, while Scarlet searched methodically through drawers and cabinets. After several tense minutes, she shook her head. "Nothing. He's too smart to keep the money here." "Wait," Eleanor whispered, studying the room with fresh eyes. "That map is new," she said, pointing to a large framed map of the territory hanging behind the desk. "He used to have a smaller one." Scarlet examined the heavy wooden frame, noticing its unusual thickness. Her fingers found a subtle catch, and with a soft click, a hidden compartment revealed itself within the frame's border. Well, she murmured, extracting a folded document. "What have we here?" "A deed to my land." Eleanor gasped, looking over Scarlet's shoulder. "But that's impossible. I never signed anything." "You didn't have to," Scarlet replied grimly, pointing to a forged signature. "And look, the mayor's signature as witness. They were planning to produce this after your execution, claiming you'd sold the land before your crime was discovered." Eleanor's face tightened with fury. "That proves they conspired against me." Scarlet continued searching the compartment, extracting a small brass key. "Mayor's missing key to the lockbox, I'd wager." Suddenly, they froze at the sound of boots on the boardwalk outside. Eleanor peered cautiously through the window. "Deputy Jenkins," she whispered urgently. "And he's not alone. There are 2 others." Scarlet cursed under her breath, quickly replacing the map and securing the hidden compartment. "Back door," she whispered, pulling Eleanor toward the rear of the office. They slipped through the door just as keys rattled in the front lock. Instead of finding the expected cell block, they discovered themselves in the sheriff's private office, a space dominated by an imposing desk, filing cabinets, and a small safe in the corner. "Try the window," Scarlet urged as voices sounded in the outer office. Eleanor moved to comply, while Scarlet searched the desk, discovering an iron box bolted to the bottom of a drawer. She worked the lock open with her knife and found a stack of banknotes, the town's missing relief fund. "Got it," she whispered triumphantly. "The window's stuck." Eleanor hissed in frustration, and the ancient frame refusing to open more than a few inches, certainly not enough to escape through. The voices in the outer office grew louder as multiple deputies gathered discussing search routes and plans to find the fugitives. "They've set alarms around town," one deputy was saying. "Sheriff's orders. Anyone tries to leave, we hear about it instantly." Eleanor's eyes widened with panic, but Scarlet's expression shifted to calculated determination. "Change of plans," she murmured, glancing around the room. Her gaze fell on the safe in the corner, and a slow smile spread across her face. "How good are you at playing dead?" Eleanor blinked at the bizarre question. "Good enough, I suppose." "Then follow my lead," Scarlet instructed. "And whatever happens, don't say a word." Minutes later, when Deputy Jenkins entered the sheriff's private office, he was met with a sight that made him freeze mid-step. Scarlet Blackwood sat casually in the sheriff's chair, her boots propped on his desk, and her gun aimed squarely at his chest. More disturbingly, Eleanor lay motionless on the floor, a dark stain spreading across her shirt. "Jesus!" the deputy exclaimed, hand flying to his weapon. "What have you done?" "Put the gun down, deputy, unless you want to join the girl." Scarlet drawled, her voice cold and steady. "Had to silence her once I got what I came for. Girl talked too much." The deputy hesitated, clearly uncertain. "You killed her. But I thought you were helping her escape." "I was helping myself to this," Scarlet replied, holding up Eleanor's journal with her free hand. Girl had a map to gold on that worthless-looking land of hers. Sheriff wasn't the only one who figured that out. "I just acted faster." She smiled thinly. "Now step aside and let me walk out of here, unless you fancy explaining to your boss how his prize prisoner got killed on your watch." "I can't just—" the deputy began, but the words died as Scarlet's guns shifted slightly, emphasizing the threat. "You can and you will," she stated flatly. "Or you'll be lying beside her while I walk out anyway." "Your choice, deputy, make it quickly." Jenkins's face paled as he stepped aside, clearly deciding that survival outweighed duty. Scarlet rose smoothly from the chair, keeping her weapon trained on him as she moved toward the door. "Smart man," she commented. "Now stay put, count to 100, and then you can raise the alarm." She paused in the doorway. "Oh, and deputy, when the sheriff gets back, tell him Scarlet Blackwood sends her regards. I'll be seeing him real soon." With that, she slipped out the front door while the other deputies were gathered in the back room examining maps. The deputy waited frozen in place for several moments before cautiously approaching Eleanor's supposedly dead body. The moment he bent over her, Eleanor sprang to life, driving her knee into his groin with explosive force. As he doubled over, gasping in agony, she followed with a surprisingly effective blow to his head, using a heavy ledger book from the desk. Without waiting to see if he remained conscious, she darted through the door Scarlet had left open and raced toward their predetermined meeting point. She'd covered half the distance when a large hand grabbed her arm, yanking her into a shadowy doorway. Eleanor fought wildly until Scarlet's voice hissed in her ear. "It's me, stop thrashing." Eleanor sagged with relief as Scarlet pulled her deeper into the shadows. "That was too close," she whispered. "But we got what we came for." "Not quite," Scarlet replied, her expression grim. "I found the money, but something's wrong. There's only about half the amount that should be there." "The mayor," Eleanor realized suddenly. "He must have the rest." A shrill whistle cut through the night, the alarm Scarlet had heard the deputies discussing. "They know we're here," she said tensely. "We need to move now." They slipped through back alleys toward Mrs. Weller's store. But as they approached, Eleanor grabbed Scarlet's arm. "Wait," she whispered, pointing to the dark store. "Something's wrong. Mrs. Weller always leaves a lamp burning in the back room, even at night." Scarlet nodded immediately, alert to the trap. They froze in the shadows as the store's back door opened, and Sheriff Davis himself emerged, dragging a struggling Mrs. Weller by the arm. "I know you're out there, Blackwood," he called into the darkness. "I have your friend here. Show yourself or the old woman pays the price for harboring fugitives." Mrs. Weller's frightened eyes darted around the alley. "Run, Eleanor," she cried. "It's a trap they were waiting." Her words ended in a pained gasp as the sheriff twisted her arm cruelly. "You have until the count of 10, he announced. "Then I start breaking fingers, one by one." Eleanor made to move forward, but Scarlet held her back with an iron grip. "That's exactly what he wants," she whispered. "We need another way. There isn't one." Eleanor hissed desperately. "We can't just let him hurt her." As the sheriff began his ominous countdown, Eleanor's mind raced. Then her eyes fell on the store's upper window and the small attic space where Mrs. Weller stored seasonal goods. "I know a way in," she whispered. "Through the rooftops. But we'll have to separate." "Too dangerous," Scarlet objected. "No choice," Eleanor countered. "Create a distraction, get the sheriff to follow you. I'll free Mrs. Weller and meet you at the church." Before Scarlet could protest further, Eleanor melted into the shadows, scaling the adjacent building with the agility of someone intimately familiar with Redemption's hidden pathways. Scarlet watched her go cursing under her breath, then deliberately kicked a bucket in the opposite direction. The noise had the desired effect. Sheriff Davis immediately dispatched 2 deputies toward the sound, while maintaining his grip on Mrs. Weller. Scarlet circled around, making just enough noise to draw attention, without revealing her position, successfully pulling the sheriff and his remaining deputy away from the store's rear entrance. Meanwhile, Eleanor crept across the interconnected rooftops, her heart pounding as she neared the small attic window she'd helped Mrs. Weller clean just weeks ago. She eased it open and slipped inside, navigating through dusty crates and barrels, until she reached the trap door leading to the store below. The main floor was dark and seemingly empty. Eleanor descended silently, straining to hear any movement. She'd nearly reached the back door when a floorboard creaked behind her. "Didn't expect you to come back for the old woman," came a cold voice she recognized as Deputy Miller's. "Sheriff thought you'd run straight for the hills." Eleanor froze slowly, raising her hands, as she turned to face the deputy whose gun was leveled at her chest. "You're smarter than this, Miller," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You know I didn't steal that money." "Doesn't matter what I know," he replied, though something in his expression wavered. "Sheriff gives the orders around here. Even when those orders include framing innocent people, stealing their land." Eleanor pressed, taking a careful step closer. "Is that the kind of lawman you want to be?" Miller's gun remained steady, but doubt flickered in his eyes. "You don't understand how things work here. The sheriff is a thief and a murderer," Eleanor finished. "And he's using you to do his dirty work. My father always said a man is defined by the company he keeps and the orders he follows." "What kind of man are you, Deputy Miller?" A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by distant shouts as the sheriff's search continued outside. Finally, Miller lowered his gun slightly. "I signed on to uphold the law," he said quietly. "Not this." "Then help me," Eleanor urged. "Mrs. Weller is innocent in all this. Help me get her to safety." After another moment's hesitation, Miller nodded curtly. "The sheriff took her to the jailhouse when you didn't show. Said something about more permanent leverage. But you can't just walk in there, they'll shoot you on sight." "Then I'll need a disguise," Eleanor replied, her mind racing ahead. "And your help," 20 minutes later, Deputy Miller escorted a figure in a rough woolen coat and hat through the darkened streets toward the jailhouse. The person kept their head down, hands apparently bound behind their back. Got one of them, Sheriff Miller called as they approached the jail. Found him trying to steal a horse at the livery. Sheriff Davis emerged from the building, squinting suspiciously at the captured figure. "That's not Blackwood," he observed. "Take off that hat, boy." Miller nudged his prisoner forward. "Do as the sheriff says." The figures slowly raised their bound hands, which weren't actually bound at all, and in one fluid motion threw a handful of pepper and ground chili directly into the sheriff's face. Davis howled in pain, clawing at his burning eyes as Eleanor, for it was she, beneath the disguise, darted past him into the jailhouse. Inside, she found Mrs. Weller locked in a cell, wide-eyed with shock at the sudden commotion. "Eleanor!" she gasped. "What on earth?" "No time," Eleanor interrupted, grabbing the cell keys from their hook. "We need to go now." Outside, Miller had drawn his gun ostensibly to recapture the escaped prisoner, but purposely firing wide as Sheriff Davis bellowed orders through streaming eyes. The distraction gave Eleanor just enough time to free Mrs. Weller and hustle her toward the rear exit. They'd almost reached the door when Sheriff Davis's voice cut through the chaos. "Stop or I shoot the old woman." Eleanor turned slowly to find the sheriff, eyes red and streaming, but functional enough to aim his gun directly at Mrs. Weller's back. His face was contorted with rage, all pretense of lawful authority abandoned. "I've had enough of this," he snarled. "You've been nothing but trouble since your father brought your mongrel mother to this town. Should have handled this years ago." "You're right about one thing," came Scarlet's voice from the doorway behind him. "You should have handled things differently years ago." Her gun was trained steadily on the back of the sheriff's head. "Drop it, Davis. It's over." The sheriff laughed, a hollow sound, devoid of humor. "You think it's that simple? This isn't about just the girl or the gold. This is about something bigger than all of us." He kept his gun trained on Mrs. Weller. "You shoot me, I shoot her. Then my men shoot you. Nobody wins. Maybe not." Scarlet agreed, her aim unwavering. "But at least the truth comes out. The town learns how their sheriff stole their relief fund, framed an innocent girl, and planned to steal land that wasn't his." "Truth," Davis spat. "You know nothing about truth, Blackwood. You think I didn't recognize you, the famous bounty hunter who doesn't ask too many questions about which side of the law her targets stand on, as long as the money's good?" He smiled coldly. "How much are they paying you for this little rescue? The mining companies have deep pockets, don't they?" A flicker of something surprised, perhaps, crossed Scarlet's face, so brief, Eleanor almost missed it. "What mining companies?" Eleanor demanded, confusion evident in her voice. "Don't play innocent." Davis sneered. "Your father was in contact with the Blackwater Mining Consortium for months before he died. They know about the gold, not just any gold, but the richest vein discovered in the territory in decades. Why do you think I've been trying to get that worthless-looking land? It's worth a fortune, and your father knew it." Eleanor shook her head, genuinely bewildered. "That's not possible. My father would have told me." "Would he?" the sheriff countered. "Or would he have kept it secret, knowing what men would do for that kind of wealth, men like me? Or women like your friend here?" Eleanor turned to Scarlet, doubt creeping into her expression. "Is that true? Did you know about the gold before I told you?" For a heartbeat, Scarlet's composure slipped, revealing something more complex than the straightforward rescuer she'd presented herself as. But before she could answer, Mrs. Weller took advantage of the sheriff's momentary distraction, driving her elbow back into his ribs with surprising force for a woman of her age. Davis staggered, his gun discharging into the ceiling as he lost his aim. In the chaos that followed, Eleanor launched herself at the sheriff, driven by fury at his revelations and years of accumulated injustice. They crashed into a desk, sending papers flying as they grappled for control of his weapon. "Eleanor!" Scarlet shouted, unable to get a clear shot as the two struggled. With strength born of desperation, Eleanor wrenched the gun from the sheriff's grasp, sending it skittering across the floor. But Davis was far from defeated. He struck her across the face with a vicious backhand, sending her sprawling. "I should have done this when I had you on the gallows," he growled, reaching for a knife in his boot. The knife never cleared its sheath. A single shot echoed through the jailhouse, and Sheriff Davis collapsed, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped between his fingers. Scarlet stood in the doorway, gun still raised, expression hard as granite. "It's over, Davis," she stated flatly. "Your conspiracy, your threats, all of it." But even wounded, the sheriff's eyes glittered with malice. "You think this ends with me? The mayor, the mining interests, they won't stop. That gold has too many people's attention now." His gaze shifted to Eleanor. "You'll never know peace as long as you own that land, girl. Never." Eleanor climbed to her feet, wiping blood from her split lip. "Then I'll face that when it comes," she replied with quiet dignity. "But it won't be on your terms." Within the hour, Judge Harmon had been summoned along with Reverend Matthews. The evidence was laid before them: the stolen money, the forged deed, and Eleanor's journal detailing her father's discoveries. Deputies loyal to the sheriff were disarmed, and Mayor Hollister was placed under house arrest until a full investigation could be conducted. As dawn broke over redemption, Eleanor confronted Scarlet in the privacy of the church, her expression troubled. "The sheriff wasn't just raving, was he? You knew about the gold before I told you." Scarlet leaned against the wall, suddenly looking more weary than Eleanor had seen her. "Not exactly," she admitted. "I'd heard rumors about a major discovery in this region. The Blackwater Consortium hired me to investigate claims that their surveyor had been murdered after finding a significant deposit. That surveyor was friends with your father. So you came to redemption, tracking my father's connection to the gold." Eleanor concluded the pieces falling into place, not just passing through by chance. "I came tracking a killer," Scarlet corrected. "Finding you at the gallows wasn't part of my plan. But seeing an innocent girl about to hang for a crime she didn't commit." She shook her head. "That was something I couldn't ride past." "Would you have told me the truth if the sheriff hadn't revealed it?" Scarlet was quiet for a long moment. "Eventually," she finally said. "But first, I needed to understand what was happening here. Who was involved, how deep the conspiracy went." She met Eleanor's gaze directly. "I may not have told you everything, but I never lied about helping you. That was real." Before Eleanor could respond, Mrs. Weller burst through the church doors, her face ashen. "They're coming," she cried. "The sheriff's men from the outpost, at least 20 of them armed to the teeth. Someone must have sent word about what happened." Scarlet was instantly alert, checking her weapons with practiced efficiency. "How long do we have?" "Minutes at most," Mrs. Weller replied, wringing her hands. "They're at the edge of town already. We need to gather the townspeople who stand with us," Eleanor said urgently. "Judge Harmon, Reverend Matthews, anyone willing to fight." "There's no time," Scarlet countered grimly. "And these aren't lawmen coming to restore order. They're the sheriff's private thugs. They won't care about evidence or justice." Eleanor's mind raced desperately, seeking a solution. Then her eyes fell on her father's journal, and inspiration struck. "The church bell tower," she said suddenly. "It overlooks the entire town square. We can make a stand there." "That's suicide," Scarlet objected. "We'd be trapped. Not if we control the narrative." Eleanor insisted, a plan forming rapidly. "Mrs. Weller, I need you to gather as many townspeople as you can, bring them to the square. Tell them the truth is about to be revealed." The older woman nodded determination, replacing fear on her weathered face. "I'll do it." As Mrs. Weller hurried out, Eleanor turned to Scarlet. "I need the sheriff's confession, written and signed. Judge Harmon can witness it." "And why would Davis confess anything?" Scarlet asked skeptically. Eleanor's expression hardened with newfound resolve. Because I'm offering him the one thing he can't resist: the location of the gold. You can't, Scarlet protested. That's your birthright, your future. It's also the perfect bait. Eleanor replied, a coldly tactical edge to her voice that Scarlet hadn't heard before. Get me 5 minutes with him, just 5 minutes. The jailhouse was eerily quiet as Eleanor entered, accompanied by Scarlet and Judge Harmon. Sheriff Davis sat propped against the wall of his cell, his wounded shoulder bandaged, but his eyes still burning with hatred. Come to gloat, half-breed, he sneered as Eleanor approached. I've come to make a deal, she replied evenly. Your freedom for information. Davis laughed bitterly. My freedom, girl, there are 20 armed men riding to ensure that. I don't need your deals. Those men are loyal to money, not to you. Eleanor countered. What happens when they learn you failed to secure the very thing they're here for? How long will their loyalty last, then? The sheriff's expression faltered slightly. What are you proposing? A signed confession, admitting your crimes, and the theft, the frame-up, all of it. Eleanor placed her father's journal on the small table between them. In exchange, I'll give you the true location of the gold. Eleanor. Scarlet began, but was silenced by a sharp look from the girl. The journal only contains part of the secret. Eleanor continued. The final piece is passed down orally from parent to child. I know where the sun sleeps in the stones. You never will without my help. Davis studied her with narrowed eyes, weighing the offer. How do I know you won't trick me? You don't, Eleanor replied coolly. But I give you my word, which is worth more than yours has proven to be. For a long, tense moment, the sheriff remained silent, calculating his options. Finally, with a grudging nod, he agreed. Judge Harmon produced paper and pen, and under his watchful eye, Sheriff Davis wrote out his confession, detailing how he and Mayor Hollister had stolen the relief fund, planted evidence in Eleanor's room, and conspired to forge documents claiming her land after her execution. As Davis signed the document, his hand steady despite his wound, he looked up at Eleanor with a mixture of hatred and reluctant respect. Your father would be proud, he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. Now you're part of the bargain. Eleanor took the confession, carefully folding it inside her shirt. Then she leaned close to the cell bars, lowering her voice to a whisper. The sheriff listened intently, his expression changing from skepticism to excitement as she described landmarks and directions that only a native of the region would recognize. Remember, she concluded, straightening up, the cave entrance is only visible at sunset on the summer solstice. That's when the shadow reveals the hidden path. Davis nodded eagerly, clearly believing every word. As they left the jailhouse, Scarlet grabbed Eleanor's arm, pulling her aside. What did you tell him? She demanded in a hushed voice. A smile played at the corners of Eleanor's mouth, not the innocent expression of the girl Scarlet had rescued, but something sharper, more knowing. I told him exactly what he wanted to hear, a beautiful lie wrapped in just enough truth to make it believable. Those landmarks will lead him on a wild chase straight into Wolf Clan hunting territory, where trespassers aren't welcomed kindly. Scarlet's eyebrows shot up in surprise, then she laughed a rare, genuine sound. You're more your father's daughter than I gave you credit for. I learned from watching men like the sheriff. Eleanor replied, her expression sobering. How they use lies and half-truths to manipulate others. It was time to use their methods against them. By the time they reached the church, Mrs. Weller had gathered an impressive crowd in the town square. Meanwhile, the thunder of approaching hooves signaled the arrival of the sheriff's reinforcements, rough-looking men who were clearly hired guns rather than legitimate lawmen. They reined in at the edge of the square, momentarily confused by the assembled townspeople. Eleanor, Scarlet, and Judge Harmon climbed to the church bell tower, which offered both visibility to the crowd below and a defensible position, Reverend Matthews joined them, his normally gentle face set with determination. A burly man who appeared to be the leader of the new arrivals spurred his horse forward. "Where's Sheriff Davis?" he demanded. "We got word of trouble." Before anyone could respond, Eleanor stepped to the edge of the tower balcony, Davis's signed confession held high above her head. "Your sheriff is in custody." She called down her voice, carrying clearly across the hushed square. "For theft of the town's relief fund conspiracy to commit murder and fraud." Murmurs spread through both the townspeople and the newly arrived men. The leader scoffed loudly. "That's a pack of lies the sheriff sent for us because outlaws were causing trouble, and I'm looking at them right now. These aren't lies," Eleanor countered, unfolding the document. "This is Sheriff Davis's own confession, witnessed by Judge Harmon and signed in his hand." She began reading aloud, her voice growing stronger with each damning line as the sheriff detailed his crimes. When she finished, the square was deathly quiet. Then one of the sheriff's men spoke up. "How do we know that's real, could be forged just like he claims that deed was?" "A fair question," Judge Harmon called down. "Which is why I witnessed the confession myself. Sheriff Davis admitted everything, including that he hired you men not as legitimate deputies, but as his private force to secure gold-rich land through intimidation and murder if necessary." This revelation caused visible unease among the hired guns, several exchanging concerned glances. Their leader, however, remained unmoved. "Don't matter what's on that paper," he growled. "We were paid to do a job, and that includes bringing down anyone interfering with the sheriff's business." He drew his gun, aiming directly at Eleanor. "Starting with you, girl." The crack of a rifle shot split the air, and the man's gun went flying from his hand, accompanied by a howl of pain. Scarlet stood at the tower's edge, rifle smoking, her expression coldly furious. "The next one goes between your eyes," she stated flatly. "And I never miss twice." Chaos erupted as the hired guns scrambled for cover, returning fire while the townspeople fled in panic. Bullets splintered the wood around the tower as Eleanor, Scarlet, the judge, and the Reverend took cover behind the bell tower's stone half-walls. "So much for controlling the narrative," Scarlet muttered, reloading her rifle with practiced speed. "It was worth a try," Eleanor replied, peering cautiously over the edge. "They've surrounded the church. We're trapped up here." "Not quite." Scarlet smiled grimly. "I rarely enter a situation without an exit strategy." She reached into her boot, extracting a small metal whistle. "Cover your ears." The piercing note that followed didn't seem remarkable to human ears. But moments later, a thunderous explosion rocked the livery stable at the far end of town. As the hired guns turned instinctively toward the blast, more explosions followed in rapid succession. The general store, the bank, and finally the sheriff's office erupted in flames. "Diversion," Scarlet explained tersely. "Set them before we came up here. Small charges, mostly smoke, but they won't know that." With the attackers distracted by the multiple fires breaking out across town, Scarlet led them to a rope she'd secured to the bell tower earlier. "Always have an escape route," she'd explained, and they descended rapidly to the church roof, then down to a side alley where horses waited courtesy of Mrs. Weller's foresight. "We can't just flee," Eleanor protested as Scarlet urged her toward a horse. "What about the townspeople, the evidence?" "The judge has his copy of the confession," Scarlet replied. "And the town isn't our concern anymore. Those men don't care about collateral damage." As if to emphasize her point, bullets whizzed past them as several hired guns spotted their escape attempt. They mounted quickly, spurring their horses toward the cover of the nearby woods. They'd nearly reached the tree line when Eleanor's horse screamed in pain, a bullet catching it in the flank. The animal stumbled, throwing Eleanor hard to the ground. She lay dazed as hoofbeats approached rapidly, the leader of the hired guns bearing down on her, his face twisted with murderous rage. "End of the line, girl," he snarled, raising his gun. Eleanor closed her eyes, certain her luck had finally run out. The expected shot came, but strangely, she felt no pain. When she opened her eyes, her attacker lay sprawled in the dirt beside her, blood blooming across his chest. Beyond him stood Mrs. Weller, holding a smoking shotgun with the steady hands of someone who had spent a lifetime hunting on the frontier. "Told you I was a fair shot," the older woman said, simply helping Eleanor to her feet. Scarlet had wheeled her horse around at the sound of the shot relief visible on her face when she saw Eleanor standing. "Time to go," she urged. "They'll regroup quickly." "Mrs. Weller," Eleanor began, but the storekeeper shook her head firmly. "I'm staying," she declared. "This is my home. Someone needs to tell the truth about what happened here today." She pressed something into Eleanor's hand, a small leather pouch. "Your father left this with me before he died. Said to give it to you when you were ready. I think that time is now." Before Eleanor could respond more, shouts echoed from the direction of town. Scarlet pulled her up behind her on the horse, and with a final grateful nod to Mrs. Weller, they galloped into the dense forest, leaving redemption and its corruption behind. They rode hard for hours, following game trails and shallow streams to throw off pursuers, finally stopping in a sheltered canyon as their exhausted horse needed rest. Only then did Eleanor examine the pouch Mrs. Weller had given her. Inside, she found a small, intricately carved stone pendant, a swirling pattern that matched markings in her father's journal, along with a folded map on thin parchment. "What is it?" Scarlet asked, building a small fire as the desert night quickly turned cold. "I'm not sure," Eleanor admitted, studying the markings. "It looks like directions, but not to gold." She traced the patterns with her finger, her expression clearing with sudden understanding. "It's a map to Willow Creek." "Willow Creek," Scarlet repeated, her head snapping up with evident surprise. "You're certain?" Eleanor nodded slowly. "My father mentioned it, once said it was a place where people could start over, where blood and background didn't matter as much as character." She looked up at Scarlet, comprehension dawning. "You know it, don't you? That's where you were planning to take me all along." For a moment, Scarlet seemed at a loss for words, a rare occurrence. Then she nodded, a mixture of emotions crossing her normally guarded face. "Yes," she admitted. "It's something like a home to me. A place I helped establish years ago for people who needed fresh starts away from the justice places like Redemption offer." "And you think they'd accept me there?" "I know they would," Scarlet replied with quiet confidence. "There's a woman there, Mrs. Chen, who runs the hotel. Toughest businesswoman you'll ever meet, but fair to her bones. She's been looking for someone with a head for figures." Hope flickered in Eleanor's eyes, but uncertainty remained. "And what about the gold? The sheriff's men will keep searching, won't they?" "We'll let them search," Scarlet said dismissively. "Your father was clever. He left just enough real clues mixed with false ones to keep men chasing shadows for years. And the Wolf clan will protect their territories from trespassers." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, gazing into the small fire. "All my life, I've been judged for my blood too. Native for the white townsfolk, too white for my mother's people. I've never belonged anywhere, not really." "Belonging isn't about where you're from," Scarlet replied, her voice softening with rare emotion. "It's about finding people who see you for who you are, not what you are." She paused, then added quietly, "I learned that the hard way." "Will you tell me," Eleanor asked, "about how you became you?" Scarlet studied the young woman's face no longer. The frightened girl with a noose around her neck, but someone who had faced death, betrayal, and violence without breaking. Someone who deserved the truth. "I was younger than you." She began, her gaze distant with memory. "Daughter of a cattle baron and a woman he never bothered to marry. When he died, his legitimate family made sure I inherited nothing but his name and their hatred. I did desperate things to survive. Her hand unconsciously touched the gun at her hip. Became good with this. Too good. Started taking jobs some honorable many not. She poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. One job went wrong. I'd been hired to track down a man accused of stealing from a mining company. Found him, but something didn't feel right about his story. I investigated instead of just bringing him in. Her expression hardened. Turned out he'd discovered the company was using slave labor imprisoned men forced to work the mines until they died. My employer wanted him silenced. "What did you do?" Eleanor asked softly. "What needed doing?" Scarlet replied simply. Helped him escape, exposed the operation. Made powerful enemies in the process. She smiled thinly. That's when I learned there's more to justice than just the law. Sometimes the law itself is the weapon of the corrupt. "Is that why you helped me? Because you saw the same pattern?" "Partly," Scarlet acknowledged. "But also because—" She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the vulnerability of the moment. "Because someone did the same for me once. A stranger who had no reason to care whether I lived or died, but who chose to help anyway. Some debts can only be repaid by passing them forward." Eleanor nodded, understanding the profound gift she'd been given, not just her life, but a chance to reshape it on her own terms. She opened her father's journal again, studying his careful notes and drawings with fresh eyes. "The gold is real," she said eventually. But my father's last message wasn't about where to find it. It was about why not to seek it at all. She pointed to symbols along the margin. "These aren't just decorations. In my mother's language, they tell a story about greed and destruction, how gold fever drove men to murder and madness." Scarlet leaned forward, intrigued. "So the whole sun sleeps in the stones business is both truth and warning," Eleanor confirmed. "There is gold there, but my father believed it was meant to remain undisturbed. 'Let the sun sleep,' he wrote here. 'Wake it, and darkness follows.'" "Poetic," Scarlet observed. "But it won't stop men from searching." "No," Eleanor agreed. "But it helps me decide what to do next." She closed the journal decisively. "I don't want that gold, not if it brings nothing but violence and corruption. I want something else entirely." "And what's that?" Eleanor's gaze was steady, transformed by the trials she'd endured and the strength she'd discovered within herself. "A life where I'm judged by my actions, not my blood. A chance to build something that can't be stolen or corrupted." She smiled slightly. "It sounds like Willow Creek might be the place to start." They traveled for days, navigating rugged terrain while evading potential pursuers. As they rode, Scarlet continued Eleanor's education, teaching her to track, to read weather patterns, to find water in seemingly barren landscapes, and most importantly, to trust her own instincts. "The land speaks if you know how to listen," Scarlet explained as they paused on a windswept ridge. "Your mother's people understood that better than most." One night, as they made camp under a vast canopy of stars, Eleanor sensed something wrong. A subtle change in the forest sounds around them. "Someone's watching us," she whispered, indicating the ridge to their west with a subtle nod. Scarlet gave no obvious reaction, but shifted imperceptibly into readiness. "How many?" "At least 3," Eleanor replied with growing confidence. "They've been shadowing us since midday." "A good catch," Scarlet approved quietly. "These aren't Davis's men, too careful, too patient. Probably scouts from one of the local tribes checking who's passing through their territory." As darkness deepened, their their watchers maintained their distance. During her watch, Eleanor found the constant observation unnerving, but remembered Scarlet's teachings about showing no fear. When she woke Scarlet for the second watch, the older woman seemed unsurprised by the report that their observers remained. "They're testing us," she explained, checking her weapons. "Seeing how we behave when we think no one's watching. Get some rest. I'll handle this." Through barely opened eyes, Eleanor watched as Scarlet calmly sat by their fire and began speaking in a language Eleanor didn't recognize, fluid, musical phrases that carried clearly in the night air. After several minutes, 3 figures emerged from the darkness, approaching with cautious dignity. They wore a mixture of traditional native garments and practical frontier clothing, their faces painted with ochre stripes. Eleanor recognized the markings as belonging to the Wolf clan. To her astonishment, Scarlet greeted them as equals, speaking their language with apparent fluency. A conversation followed, conducted partly in sign language, mixed with spoken words from at least 3 different tongues. Gifts were exchanged, information shared, and what appeared to be some form of agreement reached. When the visitors departed, melting back into the darkness, Scarlet returned to the fire with a thoughtful expression. "You can stop pretending to sleep now," she called softly. "They're gone." Eleanor sat up, abandoning the pretense. "You speak their language," she said, amazed. "Parts of it," Scarlet corrected. "Enough to show respect and explain our presence." "What did they want?" "To assess our intentions," Scarlet replied. "They've heard about what happened in Redemption. News travels fast in these territories. They respect what you did standing against corruption, and they know about your mother's bloodline." She paused. "They also offered protection, a promise that none of the sheriff's men will cross their territory to reach us." "That's remarkable," Eleanor breathed. "There's more," Scarlet continued. "They knew your father said he was a friend to their people, one of the few white men who treated them with genuine respect. The chief's son wanted me to tell you that the promise your father made to them will be honored regardless of whether you return." "What promise?" Eleanor asked, confused. "That the gold would remain undisturbed, that the sun would stay sleeping in the stones. They believe it serves a sacred purpose where it lies." Eleanor nodded slowly, feeling another piece of the puzzle fall into place. So my father wasn't just being poetic or cautious. He made an actual promise to the Wolf clan, a promise he knew might be difficult to keep once he was gone. Scarlet confirmed. "Which is why he arranged alternatives for you, why he left you the map to Willow Creek." The next day, as promised, they crested a final ridge, and Eleanor gasped at the sight spread before them. Unlike the struggling, drought-stricken community of Redemption, Willow Creek appeared prosperous and vibrant. Nestled in a green valley, with a silver ribbon of water running through its center. Most striking, however, was the diversity visible even from a distance. Native people worked alongside white settlers, Mexican families mingled with Chinese merchants, and freed slaves went about their business in what appeared to be, if not perfect harmony, then at least peaceful coexistence. "It's beautiful," Eleanor whispered, eyes wide with wonder. "It didn't happen by accident," Scarlet explained as they began their descent. "Every person here has a story, most not too different from yours. People who didn't fit elsewhere, who faced injustice or prejudice and decided to build something better." She offered a rare smile. "It's not paradise. There are still disputes, disagreements, the usual human foolishness. But they've figured out that surviving out here requires cooperation, not division." They were welcomed at the town's only hotel by the owner, a formidable Chinese woman named Mrs. Chen, who greeted Scarlet with gruff affection before subjecting Eleanor to an intimidating assessment. "So you're the girl Scarlet wrote about?" she declared, circling Eleanor with shrewd eyes. "The one who shot a sheriff in the hand." Eleanor blinked in surprise, both that Scarlet had written ahead and at the woman's blunt reference to her confrontation with Sheriff Davis. "Yes, ma'am," she admitted, lifting her chin slightly. "He was trying to kill me at the time." Mrs. Chen's severe expression cracked into a brief, approving smile. "Good. Too many people let others decide their fate." She gestured Eleanor closer. "Scarlet says you know bookkeeping, inventory management." "Yes, ma'am," Eleanor confirmed. "I handled all the accounts at the general store in Redemption." "Start tomorrow," the hotel keeper declared decisively. 6 days a week room and board included plus wages. Last clerk nearly ruined me, couldn't tell a debit from a credit. Eleanor stood straighter hope and determination, replacing the uncertainty that had plagued her since fleeing Redemption. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. I won't let you down." "See that you don't," the older woman replied briskly. "Now get cleaned up, both of you. You look like you've been dragged behind a wagon for a week." Later, as they sat on the hotel's porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Scarlet explained that she wouldn't be staying in Willow Creek. "I've got bounties to track," she said quietly. "It's my work and I'm good at it." Eleanor nodded understanding, but feeling a pang of loss all the same. This woman had saved her life, taught her to defend herself, shown her that there could be a different future than the one Redemption had planned for her. "Will you come back?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Scarlet smiled, a genuine expression that softened the hard edges life had carved into her face. "I always do," she replied. "This is the closest thing to home I've got." She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a small package wrapped in oilcloth, handing it to Eleanor. The young woman unwrapped it carefully, revealing a beautifully crafted revolver, smaller than Scarlet's own, but of excellent quality. "I can't take this," she gasped, recognizing the value of such a weapon. "It was my first gun," Scarlet explained, voice softening with memory. "Someone gave it to me when I was about your age, when I needed protection and a fresh start. Seems fitting it should be yours now." Eleanor held the weapon with reverence, understanding the significance of the gift. "How can I ever repay you?" she asked softly. "For everything you've done for me." Scarlet's gaze turned toward the town where lamps were being lit in windows. As darkness fell, her expression thoughtful. "Some debts don't need repaying," she answered finally. "Sometimes the best thing we can do is pass along the kindness we've been shown. Maybe someday you'll meet someone who needs the kind of help I gave you. When that happens, you'll know what to do." As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared overhead, the two women sat in companionable silence, each contemplating the paths that had brought them together and the different roads they would travel tomorrow. In the Wild West, where survival often meant hardening one's heart against the world's cruelties, they had found in each other a reminder that courage comes in many forms. And sometimes the bravest act is simply offering a hand to someone who has been cast aside. The following morning, Scarlet departed at dawn, promising to return within a few months. Eleanor stood watching until her friend disappeared over the distant ridge, then turned with new determination toward her future. The journey had transformed her from a frightened girl with a noose around her neck to a woman who had faced death, corruption, and prejudice without flinching. She had discovered strengths she never knew she possessed, powers of observation, resilience, and courage that had lain dormant until circumstances forced them to the surface. In the months and years that followed, Eleanor built a new life in Willow Creek. Mrs. Chen's bookkeeping position expanded as Eleanor's skills proved invaluable, eventually leading to a partnership in the hotel. She established ironclad legal protection for her land with help from Marcus Redhawk, a native lawyer educated in the East, creating a trust that combined territorial law with tribal traditions to protect the sleeping gold from exploitation. Scarlet returned as promised, bringing news of the territory's updates on the fate of Sheriff Davis, tried and imprisoned for his crimes, and occasionally new people seeking refuge and fresh starts. Together, they established an informal network of safe havens across the frontier, places where those wrongfully accused or victimized by hatred could find refuge and begin anew. The story of the cowgirl who defied a mob to save an innocent girl spread across the territories, growing with each telling, until Scarlet became something of a frontier legend. Eleanor, too, earned her own reputation, not as a victim, but as a builder, a woman whose determination and fair dealing helped strengthen the unusual community of Willow Creek. And sometimes, on clear nights, when the stars shone like diamond dust scattered across the vast dome of the sky, Eleanor would step outside and look up, feeling impossibly small, yet strangely significant beneath the eternal heavens. In those moments, she would think of all the seemingly random circumstances that had brought Scarlet to redemption on the very day of her planned execution, and she would wonder at the invisible threads that connected human lives across the wilderness, at the unpredictable ways in which one act of courage could ripple outward, changing not just a single life, but an entire community. With such thoughts to comfort her, Eleanor would return to her home, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, she would face them with the same courage that had saved her life and given her the chance to become not just a survivor, but a builder of the new world, emerging from the ashes of the old, a world where justice might sometimes falter, but never without those willing to stand against the darkness with unwavering resolve, a steady hand, and the unshakable belief that every life, even those society deemed expendable, deserved a chance at dignity and purpose. To courage, she would whisper to the stars, raising an invisible glass in tribute to the woman who had taught her its true meaning. And to second chances,